They call me the king of the frontier, but let me tell you something. That crown wasn't made of gold or silver. It was forged in the heat of 1,000 desert suns, cooled by the midnight winds of the high country, and polished by the very dust that gets into a man's lungs and stays there. Being a king on the frontier didn't mean sitting on a plush throne and giving orders from behind a marble wall. It meant being the first one in the saddle and the last one to close your eyes at night. It meant knowing the temperament of the land better than you knew your own name. People look at the map and see lines and names, but a man of the frontier sees stories, struggles, and the raw, unpainted truth of survival. I didn't set out to be a legend. I just set out to tell the story of the men who built this country with nothing but their bare hands and a stubborn refusal to be broken. That's where the true royalty lies, in the grit it takes to stand your ground when the whole world is trying to push you off it. I remember the first time I rode into Monument Valley. Those giant red monuments didn't care about my box office records or my star power. They'd seen empires rise and fall while I was still just a dream in my father's eye. To lead in a place like that, you have to earn it. You don't get respect just by wearing a badge or carrying a Winchester. You get it by showing that you're reliable when the water runs low and the trail gets steep. The frontier is a harsh judge. It strips away the pretension and the fancy talk until there's nothing left but the bone. I spent my life trying to represent that bone, the hard, unyielding core of the American spirit. Being the king of the frontier meant embodying the silence of the scout, the courage of the lawman, and the endurance of the pioneer. It was a heavy mantle to carry, but I wore it with pride because I knew the men who actually lived it deserved nothing less than my absolute best. You see, the frontier isn't just a place on a map, it's a state of mind. It's that place where the rules of the city don't apply and a man is only as good as his last decision. I've seen kings of industry lose their nerve the moment the pavement ended. And I've seen quiet farm boys find a strength they never knew they had when the wolves started circling. My job was to be the lighthouse for that kind of strength. I wanted every kid sitting in a dark theater to look up at that screen and see that being a man meant taking responsibility for your own destiny. It meant that even if you were alone on the horizon, you were the king of your own soul. That's the frontier I've spent my life defending, not just the land, but the idea that a single individual, with enough heart and enough iron in his blood, can change the course of history. That's a kingdom worth fighting for. In the uncharted territories, there's only one law that truly matters, the law of consequence. Out there, if you make a mistake, you don't get to call a lawyer or file a complaint. You pay the price, usually in sweat or blood. Being the king of the frontier meant understanding that law better than anyone else. I spent decades playing the men who brought order to the chaos, the ones who stood between the civilized world and the wild unknown. But the secret is, those men weren't trying to tame the wild, they were trying to match it. You can't conquer the frontier with a soft heart or a wavering mind. You have to be as tough as the cactus and as steady as the mountain. I've lived in those boots for so long that sometimes I can't tell where the Duke ends and the frontier begins. We became one and the same, a symbol of a time when a man's character was his only currency. I've worked with directors like John Ford who understood the language of the wilderness. He knew that the landscape was a character all on its own, a silent king that demanded our respect. We'd spend weeks out in the elements, breathing the same air as the legends we were trying to recreate. Those weren't just movies to us, they were tributes. We were building a monument to the spirit of exploration. When I'd walk onto a set, I wasn't just an actor, I was the guardian of a legacy. I made sure the horses were handled right, the guns were held right, and the attitude was exactly what it needed to be. Because if we didn't get it right, we were insulting the memory of the men who actually bled into that soil. A king has to protect his people's history, and the history of the frontier is the most valuable thing we own. It's the story of how we became who we are. People see the posters and the bright lights, but they don't see the weight of the boots. Being the king of the frontier meant that I could never just be Duke, the man anymore. I had to be the symbol. Everywhere I went, folks expected to see the man who stood up to the outlaws, the man who never flinched. And let me tell you, that's a long shadow to live in. There were days when the dust felt a little heavier and the saddle felt a little harder, but I knew I couldn't let that image flicker. Not for me, but for the millions of people who looked at that screen and saw a version of themselves they wanted to be, brave, honest, and unshakable. To be a king, you have to sacrifice the luxury of being ordinary. You have to carry the hopes and the values of a whole generation on your shoulders, and you have to do it without complaining. That was the price of admission for the frontier I built, and I paid it gladly every single day. I remember standing on those sets, looking at the young actors coming up behind me. They had the looks and the talent, but many of them were looking for the easy road. They wanted the crown without the thorns. I'd pull them aside and tell them that the frontier doesn't give a damn about your ego. It only cares about your endurance. If you want to be a leader out here, you have to be willing to bleed for the work. You have to be the one who stays out in the cold to make sure the scene is right, because that scene is going to outlive you. That's what being the king meant. It was a commitment to excellence that went beyond the paycheck. It was about creating something that would stand as a monument to the American spirit long after the cameras stopped rolling and the studios were turned into parking lots. You don't just act the frontier, you have to live it in your bones, or the audience will see right through you like a pane of glass. The silent battles were often the hardest. The battles against time, against the changing tastes of a world that was starting to value flash over substance. They tried to tell me that the Western was dead, that the king needed to step down. But I knew better. I knew that as long as there's a man who values his freedom and a woman who protects her home, the frontier is alive. It's a part of our DNA. I refused to let that fire go out. I kept writing, kept filming, and kept telling the stories that reminded us of who we are at our best. A king doesn't quit just because the weather turns sour. He stays at the helm until the ship is safe in the harbor. That frontier was my kingdom, and I wasn't about to hand over the keys to anyone who didn't understand the value of the dirt beneath their fingernails. Integrity isn't a trend, it's a foundation, and I built my reign on it. I've walked through the fires of criticism and the storms of political change, and through it all, the frontier was my sanctuary. It's the place where the truth is simple. You either stand up or you get trampled. I chose to stand. Being the king of the frontier meant I had to be the voice for the silent majority, the hardworking folks who didn't have a megaphone but had a whole lot of heart. They saw in my characters a reflection of their own struggles and their own quiet heroism. I didn't play superheroes. I played men with flaws and scars who did the right thing anyway. That's the real king, not the one who never fails, but the one who never quits. I wanted to show that even when you're outnumbered and the odds are stacked against you, you still have a choice. You can choose to be a victim, or you can choose to be a man of action. And on my frontier, we always chose action. There's a special kind of dignity in the work of a pioneer. It's a dignity that doesn't come from a title or a bank account, but from the knowledge that you've built something that wasn't there before. Whether it's a ranch in the desert or a legacy on a film strip, it's about the act of creation. As the king of the frontier, I felt a kinship with every man who ever broke ground or drove a stake into the earth. We were all part of the same tribe. We were the builders. We were the ones who looked at a wasteland and saw a future. That vision is what kept me going when the body started to ache and the years started to pile up like snowdrifts. I knew that every mile I rode on that screen was a mile ridden for the dream of a free and independent people. That dream is the real crown, and I was just the one lucky enough to hold it for a while. I've seen the world change in ways I never thought possible. I've seen the horses replaced by steel and the silence replaced by noise. But the frontier hasn't gone anywhere. It's just moved inside us. It's the frontier of the soul, the place where we decide what we're willing to stand for. As I look back on the decades I spent wearing the Duke's hat, I realized that the most important thing I did wasn't winning a gunfight or saving the day. It was reminding people that they have the power to be their own kings. You don't need me to lead you. You just need to find that same iron in your own blood. The frontier is still there, waiting for anyone with the guts to explore it. It's a kingdom that belongs to the brave, the honest, and the unyielding. And as long as you keep your word and stand your ground, you're as much a king as I ever was. The sun is getting low now, and the shadows are stretching across the valley I love so much. Every king eventually has to ride into the sunset, and I'm no exception. But the beauty of the frontier is that it doesn't end just because one rider leaves the trail. The stories we told, the values we shared, and the grit we demonstrated, those things are eternal. They are the seeds we planted in the heart of this country, and I see them sprouting in the most unlikely places. I see it in the eyes of a young man who refuses to take the easy path, I see it in the steady hand of someone doing an honest day's work for an honest day's pay. That's my true kingdom. Not the box office records, but the spirit of the American individual that refuses to be tamed or broken. I'm just a man who is honored to tell the story. So, as I prepare for the final roundup, I want you to remember this. A crown is only as heavy as the secrets you keep and the promises you break. If you live a life of integrity, that crown will be as light as a feather. Don't be afraid of the frontier. Don't be afraid of the hard work or the lonely miles. Embrace them. They are what build the character that can survive any storm. Be the kind of person who leaves the trail better than you found it. Be the kind of leader who doesn't need a throne to be respected. The world is full of pretenders, but it's starving for the real thing. Be the real thing. Keep your eyes on the stars and your feet in the dirt. That's where the magic happens, in that space between the dream and the reality. It's been a hell of a ride, and I wouldn't change a single dusty mile of it. The bugle is sounding, and it's time for me to join the old guard. But I'm leaving you with the map and the compass. The frontier is yours now. Protect it, honor it, and never, ever let the fire of independence go out. You have the heart of a king inside you. Don't let the world tell you otherwise. I'll be watching from the high country, where the light is always gold and the horses never tire. Keep riding, stay tough, and keep your word. This is the Duke, the king of the frontier, signing off for the last time today. I'll see you at the end of the trail, where the sunset never ends. Happy trails, my friends. Ride tall and never look back. The horizon is waiting for you. Goodbye for now, but the legend lives on through you. Stay unchained. Stay true.